Patreon video. Yes, it is live! We have takeoff! It is working! He says, crossing fingers, touching wood, and standing on one leg. He is achieving it all, the holy trifecta of good luck things. Yes, crossing fingers, touching wood, and standing on one leg. It's an amazing skill. Hello, everyone. How are we all doing? Yes, XSplit has been working fine for me all day, has been happy with me all day, and then suddenly, when I want to go live, has decided, you know what, I want to go wrong. I want to say you're no longer connected to YouTube. I want to say you are no longer accepted as your Google account doesn't exist. I want to say that I need an update of everything. And I go, XSplit, you evil genius, you doing this again to cause me stress. Hello, everyone. How are we doing? So, it is Patreon 54. Hello to everyone. Thank you for everyone who's here. Sorry again for the late start. We're about a quarter of an hour late, thanks to the ministrations of the glorious thing that is known as XSplit. At some point, I will find the people who code and develop it and send out those updates for me on a Thursday, and I will roundly beat them. Probably with their own manuals, because their manuals are big enough to do far more damage than my mere humble hands. Hello, Peter Dawson. Hello, Knight6831. Hello, John Shea. Hello, Albert Zaski. Hello, Rick Vasava. Hello, Stafford Thompson. Hello, Carl Van Gasberg. Hello, Dave Brennan. Hello, Dunrick Anhammer. Hello, Darius Radsky. Hello, George Newman. Hello, HMS Madan. Hello, Angela Paul. Hello, everyone. Hello, Stage. George Newman. Bijon. And David Golding. Hello. Abluski. Have I caught up with everyone saying hello to everyone? Yeah, yes, hello. Hello, John Sykes the Third. Hello, Dan Freeman. So Dan Freeman and Stafford are on as admins, which is always good. Hello, Yickers. Hello, DG40. Hello, Felix B. Hello, Zachary Gherkin. Hello, Captain Seaforth. Hello, Carl Harmon. And hello, everyone. So, yes, there are going to be some really large torpedoes in this video. There is definitely at least a picture of a long lance at some point. And there is a starting off picture of a whitehead. So, this was quite an interesting thing to get because, well, how do I put this? I've done something similar on this in the past, but not quite this. And so I thought, well, that's okay. But I don't want to repeat myself. So what am I going to do? Well, I can get around that. And I did. And as you can see, tell, we have got another live on Sunday, which is Patreon 55, which is all about the survey ships, because it makes sense. And I just remembered I don't have to record a video for tomorrow because it's already recorded. Hey. That makes life so much easier when you know you've already recorded the video. Oh. Okay, right then. So, good times had by all. So I need to record 3 videos tomorrow, but I don't need to record the one for tomorrow. Oh. Yes, hello Malaga. Hello Captain. Hello everyone. Yeah, it's making sure you have enough videos for while I'm traveling in Canada, because the live should work. I have got everything to do lives while I'm in Canada. Me and Drac have a plan for doing lives while we're in Canada. So I cannot guarantee the timing of all the lives, because some of them will appear pretty random and they might be pretty darn short. But you might find you get some very interesting dual uploads from Canada of me and Drac going, "Hello everyone, we're here." Captain XSplit Mark 14, you Ernie King. It's getting perilously close to Mark 14. It is. Bring out the fluffy torpedo for illustrative purposes. I knew I was missing something. Yes, I do need the fluffy torpedo. The fluffy torpedo is not that far away yet. But you think I need to get it for illustrative purposes, it's not that far. Hello. Meet the fluffy torpedo. Yep. fluffy torpedo. Very useful for illustrative purposes, and will be around at certain points. Now, first things first. You know, I've been to the dentist today, and actually enjoyed the joy of the attentions of a hygienist. It's always nice when those people find you. Yeah. Sorry, moth. I'm still drinking Iron Brew. Every single time I go to them, they go, "You need to floss," and I go, "Yes, I do." You need to use an electric toothbrush. Yes, I do. You need to drink only water. Yes, I do. Do you intend on doing any of these things you're saying, yes, I do need to do? No, I don't. I drink water and milk, and Iron Brew. Occasionally Coke and Fanta. I know, it's bad for me. I do know it's bad for me. But I also don't drink alcohol, and I don't drink coffee and tea, so, you know, it all balances out in the end. Don't worry, there'll be a long patrol for this. Will come out on Saturday. The long patrol for the survey ships will come out on Monday. And the long patrol, the other recorded videos will come out over the next couple of weeks. Basically, the 3 videos I record tomorrow morning are going to be the long patrol for this, the long patrol for the survey ships, and the long patrol for cruisers under the London treaties. So, torpedoes and their ships, 1900 to 1939. Now, this is one of those things which is going to get interesting and going to get random quite quickly. And that's because these come in right at the end, but they come in after this sort of thing is towards the end, so I don't include them towards the end. But I'm going to cover the, broadly speaking, doctrines for surface ships with torpedoes. Now, specifically, the request did not include submarines. It was about torpedoes and destroyers. Now, I've included torpedo boats in that destroyer heading because otherwise you get into a lot of problems, because technically it goes torpedo boats and there's torpedo cruisers and all sorts of things. And then there becomes torpedo boat destroyers, and it's a constant balancing of firepower and effect. So I lengthened the desire of destroyers to various things. Because of the actual question, and you can find the proper full question that this came from down below in the description. Now, here is the Canada trip, which I'm off on next week, thanks to all of you. As you can see, I fly out on the 2nd. Expect a video to go live on the 1st with some very interesting stuff in for you all. It's already recorded, it's up there. And then, so thanks to you, I get a take off on the 2nd. Drac and the rest of the crew join me on the 3rd, after I've been round Haida. In return, I will be picking them up from the airport. So for Dan, who I am relying on to escort 2 historians through an airport, both of whom get distracted by interesting bits of engineering, and I love them both dearly, but they do get distracted by interesting bits of engineering. Dan, I'm relying on you to do the escort. You might not be watching. I thought you were around at one point earlier, so I'm presuming you're there. So I'm hoping you will pick up on this. I'll be the person waiting by the car to go, hello, come in, get in, let's get you to some food. Then we have Saturday, filming Haida. She's open to the public that day. You're more than welcome to come and see us. Then it's dinner with the Canadian fans. Then we on Sunday, we technically we are planning the Blue Jays game day. We're probably going to see the Canadian Aviation Museum. We're not planning on doing any real filming there at the moment, as far as I know. But well, I haven't organised it, but I can. I have notified them that we're coming, so we've got sort of permission if we want to do any bits. and pieces while we're wandering around, sort of. And also Niagara Falls. If the weather is good enough, I am trying to get Thrak to jump up with me on the you all know the sort of the it's not abseiling, it's zip lining over the falls. We both think that'd be quite fun, and you can apparently do that on the Canadian side. So yeah, we'll be doing that. And then Monday, it's to film the Sullivans and Little Rock. We've been allowed to go on there. The rules are we cannot do any more damage. It's basically, well, the rules are we have to leave it in the same state or better than we found it. That means that we are not going to let anyone do the immortal words of, but there's a cool dial to turn. If anyone touches the dial, I will be very, very upset with them. Okay? Leave dials alone. Then on Tuesday, we fly to Halifax. We might be doing some stuff with SimSec in the evening. We don't know. Visit Film Sackville on the Wednesday. Go to the Museum of the Atlantic on the Thursday. Fly back to Hamilton. Film Audua on the Friday. Basically, have the Saturday free to wander around and doing things. And then fly home on the Sunday afternoon. Arrive back in the UK on the Monday. So, Dan, your response of "aho" worries me. Nigerian, how did a Whitehead torpedo defeat the Blucher's defenses? It hit at a sort of the range in a place it wouldn't do well to be hit by a torpedo, and it was quite a big torpedo it was hit with. Quite a big one indeed. Andrew, that's what is. We're officially flying back. But, well, you know, accidents may happen. So, Thompson, what about switches or levers? Leave them alone. Look, there are some ships here where you are allowed to touch those things. That's fine. On the Sullivans, no. Anyway, to Torpedoes Pre-1900. And well, this is a sort of interesting question and a sort of somewhere to start off with, really. Pre-1900, torpedoes have gone through many, many changes. Remember, torpedoes started off as basically a variation of a moored mine. They've evolved. There have been spar torpedoes, which involved a piece of explosive attached to a very long pole. To explain the spar torpedo, instead of you having a torpedo which goes flinging through the water, you're basically a ship with a pole going, I want to touch you. It's turning naval warfare into a game of tag, where this is what you're tagging your opponent with. Sorry, got distracted by something there for a second. My Fitbit seems to be deciding when to charge or not. Oh well. So, eventually, after much discussion with mainly with the Austro-Hungarian Navy, Whitehead, I don't know, called Whitehead, comes up with a torpedo which is self-propelled. And it follows the rough form which has dictated the rough form of torpedoes ever since. You have at the front a warhead. Then you have propellant. And then you have an engine. Now, this can create its own fun in a torpedo because it can create its own buoyancy and trim issues. If you have a very heavy warhead, you can make it nose heavy. If you have fuel, a lot of fuel for long range, and it burns it off, well, that can also affect the weight and can actually cause the torpedo to slightly rise in the water, because what is going to fill the space? And also, you must remember, it becomes less dense, which affects it. So these are all things you have to start carefully calibrating with torpedoes. But they become incredibly attractive to a certain kind of mind. That is the mathematical mind, because you see, they are attractive to the school of thought in warfare, which is that everything is a science. And you can quantify and scientifically prove that these marvels of engineering are going to be amazing. Because they're science. And this is coming from someone who supports science and engineering, and as you know, it doesn't all. But like any religion, it is good in moderations. If you are dealing with people who are fanatical in any way, shape, or form in life, it can become really problematic. And there are people who believe everything is what they do is the answer to everything. And it's usually it is a major part. Sometimes it is a major part of the answer, but it's never usually the full answer. If you can scientifically prove something is going to happen, and therefore scientifically prove the best course of action is Y, you have to prove so in a way that A, others can replicate, so they can follow your logic and support you, and B, you also then have to get everyone else on your side to agree with you, because if you sound like you're just being arrogant and just calling everyone who disagrees with you stupid, they probably aren't going to follow you. A little bit of political advice there. I say, what was the 21-inch Mark IV torpedo intended to replace? The Mark III torpedo. Pretty much, it's replacing the Mark II. The Mark III never really gets in service. But yeah, that's what it's there for. The Mark III doesn't really sort of exist. They sort of skip it. Basically, it replaces the Mark III because the Mark III never comes into service. Naturally, I've booked a flight home plus also a week of leave after I'm scheduled to go back in case we choose a slow route home. That could be fun. It's about a week. Andrew Paul, Spar Torpedo, would you like to touch and transport a large explosive warhead with a 20 or 30-foot pole? If yes, you have a Spar Torpedo. You also have a very complicated life. There is a reason why this is a much better idea than a spar torpedo. Mainly, it keeps you far away from the explosive point at the point of the explosive, and it also keeps you further away from your opponent. Now, the big advantage of the Whitehead torpedo and what it offers to the Royal Navy, and what it offers to the French Navy, what it offers to every Navy, is it is a giant killer. You are looking at the 1900s version of David's slingshot. You're talking about an age where that story and many others was a big part of the lexicon and the communication understanding. And there are many parables of the torpedo being a slingshot. It's going to kill the giant. The giant, of course, at this time is the Royal Navy. The point is this: what are the biggest targets going? Battleships. Are they maneuverable? Well, actually, they are a bit more maneuverable than cruisers in terms of their turning rate at this point, because the cruisers tend to be slightly longer. But the cruisers are also faster, which evens that up. What these will do is they will take out your battleship. They can theoretically allow a very small ship to take out a very large ship by making a hole in it which lets water in. And please note, two ways you sink a ship: fire and letting water in. Letting air in doesn't sink ships. It might create HMS Pepperpot, but it doesn't sink ships. Letting water in sinks ships. Torpedoes sink ships. It's kind of the reverse as when you're dealing with spaceships, in which case letting the air out will tend to kill the ship. Causing a fire, which is consume the oxygen inside and going to make it uninhabitable for the crew, will tend to kill ships. Causing a fire on a warship that consumes the oxygen inside and kills the crew, or burns them alive, will tend to kill ships. That one is the same. But torpedoes on Earth, they're let in water, the ship tends to sink. However, there is a problem with this as an idea. Because it's like any time someone comes up with a wonder weapon, a giant killer, someone starts to think about countering it. And be very afraid, because the one constant in history is this: anything humans can create, humans can come up with a counter to. Now, I know people will start turning around and go, well, there's the ballistic missile. We haven't created a counter to that. The counter to the ballistic missile is the fact you have your own ballistic missiles and they're all armed with nuclear warheads. So no one really wants to get involved in that. That's the counter. Now, the first vessels to be armed with these revolutionary weapons were appropriately, well, the first vessels were some very interesting sloops and cruisers, but the first actually proficient ships that were designed to really make use of them and actually could target them, because they started to work out there's a trouble with the ones originally, that especially the original Whitehead torpedoes, that you couldn't really steer them. You were just a case of fire in direction and hope they go in that vague way. You come up with these torpedo boats. We have a Norwegian one at the top. We have a British one there. They're both 1870s. Before any of you answer the question about whether or not you'd actually like to go to sea on one, just remember that the navies, whilst they often do ask for volunteers, they often have 20 people lined up and go, "We're asking for 20 volunteers." So whilst technically they're volunteers, because they all volunteered, there might not have been much choice in whether or not they actually volunteered. It's called enhanced volunteering. It happens. James, RNS object is pronounced Ojibwa. Ojibwe. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Elliot. Okay, well, hello. If you keep poking that around, you'll be banned to banned to OnlyFans. Um, so look, I may or may not actually have set up an OnlyFans account at one point to wind up various people. There may be an OnlyFans account. It's got nothing on it, but I may have actually set one up at one point to wind up people. You can work out what I'd have called it. Anyway, nice hearing. What killed off the method of using torpedoes against surface ships, leaving them only for use against submarines? Uh, Missiles, pretty much. Pretty much, it's the missiles which kill off the. You have space. You can either have anti-ship torpedoes or anti-ship missiles, and anti-ship missiles have a far longer range than anti-ship torpedoes, and as we all know, a mission kill is as good as a kill, especially these days. Nice. I'm guessing using the 21-inch Mark IV torpedoes from the Eastern Model 2 was because the time didn't allow. It's Let's put it this way: the torpedo in service in World War II is very different to the torpedo which was in service in World War One. It's been upgraded several points, and they've got quite a lot of other torpedoes in service by that point, including the Mark 6, 7, 8, and I think even the 9, 10, and was it 12 in service in both for World War Two, or just came? I think 12 came into service after World War Two. They were looking into that. But 11 got into service in World War Two. Neptune, why did the RN Admiralty not buy up off what had Whitehead his ideas painted and gently let them rot in their corner? Because, to be honest, he wasn't the only one building it, and they were happy to use the ideas themselves. Vision, Mr. Smith's Albert didn't know about spar torpedoes when he attacked the SM Koningluz. Save him from cutting holes in the bows of the African Queen. Yeah. Anyway, these little ships are pretty much expendable. Why are they expendable? Because even the original torpedoes are not that long range, so they're still having to get close. And believe it or not, if you hit a battleship in one of the places where it's actually vulnerable to torpedoes, especially Freedom starting to work out, hang on, how are we going to defend against torpedoes? There's going to be a jolly big bang. And it could well take you with it. Because you're talking about a lot of explosive. Karen, what's the shaped charge element that went from AT weapons to torpedoes the other way around, or was it parallel development? It's sort of a parallel development in that there have been shaped charges around. They've been starting shaping charges a while back. They started working on it a while back. So, anyway, you're behind David Beatty OnlyFans? No. But the last generation of torpedoes, first generation missile boats, the SAR class of the Israeli Navy, for example. Yep. So Hackenberg, the scary thing is that someone there most likely is someone who would pay to see you warring your torpedo around. That is the worrying thing, but we'll leave that to one side. we're not going to get into the French pre-dreadnoughts. There has been enough on Twitter about French pre-dreadnoughts without me getting involved in it on YouTube. Then why do torpedoes largely standardize around 21-inch mark? It's mostly due to weight. Okay, once you go bigger than 21 inches, you are taking it gets a lot heavier. It also starts to take up a lot more space. It's kind of like when we're talking about the caliber of battleship guns. Yeah, we can make an 18-inch. Yes, we could probably make a 20-inch and 22-inch and those sort of things. But the thing is, how fast would your 22-inch gun fire and reload? How many shells would you be able to carry? And how accurate would it be? That's starting to become problems. Now, honestly, there are advantages to a 24-inch torpedo, and the Japanese certainly pursue the 24-inch torpedo, as we all know, long lance. And the British do look at the 24-inch torpedo with Nelson and Rodney. But the 21-inch torpedo is far easier logistically to support than the 24-inch. You can carry more of them on your destroyers, theoretically. You can certainly store more of them on supply ships. You can, and that can make a difference, especially when you're thinking about mass attacks. And that is the trouble. It's how are you thinking about using your torpedoes? There's also the fact of legacy platforms. If you're going to have to make a 21-inch torpedo to keep your legacy platforms going anyway, if you upgrade, what's the cost of upgrading to 24-inch? Are you going to have to rebuild all your legacy platforms, get rid of them, render them useless, just use old stuff, which might not be as good and makes them even more difficult? It's a complicated matter. So 21-inch, once you've got onto it, becomes the obvious choice to keep to. When they discover compressed air could power a torpedo? That's an interesting question. I'm checking the date. Let's see. Compressed air starts off with the Whitehead torpedo in 1866. So that's how long it's been. At various points, they have come with different variations on it. But yeah, 1866 is when compressed air starts. So, here are the most famous adopters of the torpedo. And basically, it comes down to a phrase I've been hearing a lot lately, called deterrence by denial, but victory by denial. Everything. The Junicole is, of course, famously obsessed with mathematics. They are like any French naval force. Since the times of the Revolution, the French have been obsessed with mathematics, scientific military force, the application of science, reason, and logic to win the art of war. Okay, so here is the first thing. They start off with explosive shells are going to win us future wars. To which the response is the ironclads, along with even bigger guns. Okay. Then it's torpedoes. Torpedoes will erase the advantage of the enemy's battle fleet. There are many problems when you come to this, but the Junicole is basically based on victory or deterrence by denial. It was saying to the larger power, A, it was admitting you're weaker and never going to catch them, but B, it was saying, you can't come here because all these little small ships I've got will exact such a price from you, everyone else will beat you up. It's basically a forerunner of the risk fleet theory, and actually, judging by a presentation I heard the other day, some modern, even possibly NATO-ish doctrine coming around at the moment. Okay. The problems with it were, you're not the only ones who have torpedoes, so does your opponent. Secondly, to fire a torpedo, it starts off with being the idea that they are going to run straight and true and be perfect, and that you can do this with your small ships. This is fine as long as your opponent has big guns and can't fire back at you. But the moment they start having guns which can fire back at your small ship and can track it successfully, you're in trouble. You're in a lot of trouble. That is the problem for the Junicol. The answer to the torpedo was rapid firing guns. Take out the platform. I never heard that one before. That's for sure. I mean, it makes sense because simply because you need to spin a propeller, airworks, and as well as any other fluid, and has the useful component of proper compressibility. Yep. Nice agreement. Speaking of the ship get close, if Hood had finished her turn and had a full broadside of Bismarck and Union at Denmark Straits, what are the chances that Hood would start firing her Mark IV torpedoes at them? If her torpedoes are bearing, she'll fire them. Try that. I think logic is a bit different than using math. Maths, as I'm British. Here is the point. If you're going to use torpedoes, you have to presume on two things. One, if you fire your torpedoes, what is your opponent going to do? The idea was you fired at the spread torpedoes, they would get hit. Well, hang on. What happens if they're maneuvering, zigzagging or something like that, and firing small guns at you while you're trying to move? So you're having to zigzag to avoid the shells, and then you're firing your torpedoes. Can you see the way you're entering in a lot of it? You're starting to enter in a lot of difficulty into the targeting analysis. And that is the problem. Whenever you read some of these things about this, they presume the enemy is going to sit around and wait to be acted upon. Never presume your opponent is stupid, dumb, or imbecilic. If they turn out to be, all power to you. But if you presume that from the beginning and they turn out to be in any way mildly competent, then there it is. How they launched the Torpedo way back then? Well, they tended to have various means. They would have some launchers in the bow, etc., and some of the first ones they pushed, but they had various means of actually launching them into the water. Given that today we only have rockets and torpedoes on tournaments, could one say that the Junicol was way in advance of its times? Not really. Mainly because just because those are the weapons the Junicol espouse doesn't mean the methodology they espouse for using them is any good. At Admiral Fisher's retirement in 1910, Fred T. James said that his greatest achievement was his role in the founding of the Vernon Torpedo School. That was definitely one of Jackie Fisher's big things. Now, second, in regards to size, why was it incomparable design of 18-inch torpedo tubes, not 21? Because that's what Jackie Fisher put on it. And I see him in good of it. So the Junicol is fun. But the trouble is, they're looking at torpedoes in an interesting way. And it starts off one way and evolves into different ways. In fact, quite a lot of the basic principles of torpedo usage will be written down and written about first thanks to the Junicol, which is why torpedo gets associated with the Junicol so much. That doesn't mean it necessarily occurred there. It doesn't mean that other navies aren't necessarily using it first. It just means the Junicol is pretty much prolific and will tend to take any idea to try and prove themselves right. Draconid, somehow this explains some of the early tank air power and even early US nuclear strategists. American, by the way. I am allowed to be sarcastic when we do things. Well, the air power strategists we can, of course, blame on Giulio Duhe, which means we can blame the Italians. Tank strategists were mostly British, so you can blame us. And torpedo strategists were British and French, so you can blame us again. It works. Vision, the Junicol would have embraced missile boats and diesel subs in the Cold War and drones today. Would not have supported supercarriers. Oh, true. They were not. And they don't. Because if you think the Junicol has gone away just because it's been repeatedly shown to be not a sensible idea, think again. We're talking about a French school of philosophy and of war. In a nice way, they never die. They just change names and carry on. Hackenbergville, talking tops. Have you heard about the Husfaden disaster? I've heard about it. The destroyers being destroyers now are moored on board explosion, possibly a torpedo accident. But I haven't really heard much. I haven't really looked into it that much. When in doubt, blame the British. That's always a good idea. We're used to it. Hi, Glimstream. Isn't the Junicol strategy okay for coastal defense and trash for everything else? Well, here is the thing. There is someone who does make good use of the Junicol. Now, good old Jackie Fisher is famous for battle cruisers and dreadnought battleships. But honestly, someone's already mentioned the Vernon School and his obsession with torpedoes and getting torpedoes being set up and done right. That he's very much a part of that. But he's also a big part of submarine forces in the Royal Navy and destroyer fighters. In fact, one of his critical things he's aiming for in his time as First Sea Lord is flotilla defense. But you see, the thing is, the problem with the Junicol is it says you don't need battleships. You just have surface raiders, a couple of them, which are what those interesting ships, cruisers, sort of things they build are. We've already been into them, and I don't need to get into that particular Torpedo today. But what he does is he goes, well, the flotilla defense can work. If you use it with mine layers, torpedo boat destroyers, and submarines, then I can make a flotilla defense that works, which frees up my battle fleet to go where I need it to in the world. So, under the Junicol, it is the primary force. It is the force which will destroy the enemy battle fleet. It's the force which will deter the conflict. Under Jackie Fisher, it's the enabling force. And there's a very different policy once you're dealing with that. Hello, Wayne's World. Division. They are big undispersed air power. A fleet of Atlantic conveyors, cheap and plentiful weapons. In fact, Ukraine's necessary strategy against the Russian Navy, as the doc is now saying, coastal defense attack. Basically, you have to remember the Unicol doesn't go away. We still see it to this day. We still see its legacy every time someone starts talking about it. And one of the things you have to notice is, I will say this, okay? When you start talking about things like deterrence by denial, or, and this is the classic word, classic thing. If it looks like the forces we deployed might cause escalation rather than deterrence, we will then have to be prepared to withdraw them. Then you're not A, not doing deterrence, and B, deterrence doesn't work that way. Because here is the thing. You can only really deny the enemy the chance to do something by one of two things. You have an accident where one of your ships hits theirs, or you start shooting. Otherwise, the sea is technically international waters, and they can technically go where they want. You can just watch them while they're doing it. Which is not very satisfying and doesn't really work that well. If you have a 1-to-1 ratio, and if you deploy less ships than them, you're in more trouble. So, how do you do deterrence? And how do you do it in a Unicol fashion if you're a weaker power? Well, if you're a weaker power, A, you be part of an alliance, and B, you do an offset strategy. The force I see in front of me in the zone of conflict might be only one ship. And this is something Jackie Fisher and his successors in the Admiralty do a lot. Tsingtao is a classic example of it. One ship with a sloop goes into Tsingtao. Okay? That's one ship versus 3. It's a deterrence and weakness. You know, it's a deterrence by denial, isn't it? No, it isn't. It's deterrence by strength. How's it by strength? Because guess what's also at sea at the time, and the Japanese know it. All the rest of the British cruisers are at sea. The British carry in the areas at sea. And, apparently there's a battleship transiting the Suez Canal. When you have, you don't deter, the forces you have in the area are just one aspect of a deterrent strategy. But you cannot do deterrence by denial. You cannot do defense by denial. You cannot do victory by denial. You need to act to victory. For victory, you need to actually win. For deterrence to work, you need to show strength. And an alliance is only as strong as the sum of its members. And usually, I always say, if an alliance, and you measure an alliance strength not by its strongest member, but by an average of the rest. Because the strongest member is often stand out and set apart. They are not the same as being the alliance. Especially not if they're so strong that pretty much the alliance can't do anything without their support. That's why some of the coalitions against Napoleon failed, because the British are too overmighty in them. And they can't do anything without the British support. Can see you. Would you say the Austro-Hungarian Navy successfully implemented Unicol flotilla defense in World War I? Well, they didn't, because they did it they had their dreadnoughts as well. So they were doing they actually had better ships than the French did. So, it's a case of, we're doing flotilla defense, but it's flotilla defense backed by battleships. Okay, Stafford. Vision. See something Glowmaster just flew over. Got that excited. Air National Guard seems to be doing more these days. Our local base says C-30s, C-170s are from downstate. That's Force. The ship isn't a deterrent, the flag on the stern is. Correct. Which is why I worry when people go, well, you know, we've done this deterrence and we haven't had to put X, Y, or Z capital ships to sea. And I'm sort of going, that's because they should already be at sea. That's part of your deterrence posture. It is. Gugolander, about the NATO deterrent reference, isn't there the minor problem of deterring an enemy that doesn't care about deterrence? Let's put it this way. You have to be very careful with deterrence when you're listening to what the opponent is saying. Because they will claim you moving anything in there is a threat in justification for war if they think it'll make you back down. They will play blood-curdling, just like Jackie Fisher was. Jackie Fisher uttered threats you wouldn't want to believe. He said things which were absolutely diabolical. And it worked for him. It really did. But did he actually mean he was going to do it? Probably not. It's basically a case of Jackie Fisher says these things from a position of strength. If you want to be in a position of capability, not necessarily strength. So if we look at forces around the world, as I keep going, 1 is basically a white elephant. 2 is capability when it's available. 3 is availability. 4, guaranteed capability. 5 usually have 2 available. So guaranteed capability plus reserve. This is something you have to sort of work through and realize. The scenario is not that easy for anyone to get involved in. If you are relying on a simple off-strat strategy, that won't work. You need to have something to actually offset your opponent with. And your opponent will know those figures as well as you do. So if you're relying on a capability being available for part of your deterrence mission, and I would argue, for example, if you're a medium power and you have aircraft carriers, that's probably a key part of your conventional deterrence assets. You'd better have at least 3, if not 4, flight decks in service, which can all take carrier aircraft. If you don't, you're going to have times when you don't have something available. Because what's going to happen is, let's say ship 1 is on the other side of the world on another deployment. Okay? Something flares up. The trouble is, ship 2 is in a long-term refit. Now, if you have 3 ships, ship 3, probably at that point, will be somewhere in the UK, probably sitting port side, or will be doing training and working up. So, yeah, is it fully ready for war? No. Is it able to be rapidly deployed? Yes. Because you're relying on your veteran, your experienced crew to hold everything together and make it actually ready for war, ready for its mission by the time it gets to where it needs to be on station. If you have 4, you pretty much have that guaranteed. That availability of a surge ship guaranteed. 5 means usually you have roughly 2 sitting at sea. 1 around the UK and maybe 1 in the Far East. And another 1 probably orbiting the status of being available if you need it. While one will be in long-term refit and one will be probably nowhere near available because of either training, refit, or just having come back from deployment and, frankly, needing a good fumigation. That's the reality of owning ships. They exist in this thing called saltwater. They make port visits. They have crews aboard for months at a time, all of which humans are humans. You need to do it. Now, well, if we start off with the compressed air, Whitehead torpedoes in 1906 could reach a range of nearly 1,000 meters, 1,100 yards, at an average speed of 35 knots. And after that, they had heated torpedoes, compressed. It just, let's put it this way, it gets more and more interesting. But pretty much, you're talking less than 2 kilometers by World War II, or World War I beginning. If I appear at all tired or soothing, it's because I've spent the last 2 days at a very interesting conference. Actually, speaking of conference, I need to put some things out. I didn't put things out at the beginning, and I meant to. I come from conference with gifts. They won't be staying with me because they'll be going to my friend who's obsessed with rubber ducks. But there you go. Actually, let's put them there. We have the NVL, Naval, Golden Duck. We have PAL Aerospace, traditional rubber ducky. And in what I suggest might be a reading on the company, we have a Fails stress ball. Palais stress ball, okay? Also have some stuff from Harlan and Wolf, etc., but not with down here. It's cool. Lots of interesting things. This one I am keeping. What I also notice is the wings are strident on this duck. They're traditional on this duck. Strident wings. This one looks like it's about to take off. This one looks like it's contently sailing. Could be also an augur for good things, because NVL are doing some good work at the moment. They're producing some interesting stuff. Okay, you can go there. So, the 5 sort of eras of surface ship torpedoes and their tactic doctrines. We have sniping, mass supplemented by firepower, sniping in the dark, and mass supplemented by maneuver. There is a point of this. It's mathematical. If we put enough torpedoes in the water, we will guarantee a hit. Provided, of course, all the torpedoes work. Enough of the torpedoes work. Enough of the torpedoes run where they're supposed to. Enough of those torpedoes have been fired at spot where they correctly anticipate the enemy ship is going to be, and provided the enemy ship actually ends up where it's supposed to be. It doesn't make any sudden maneuvers. And sure, is that because nobody wanted to muck around and find out with Jackie Fisher? Yeah, he might actually have done it, was the general theory. Fisher actually hated war. That was one of the things about Fisher that is often unremarked, but is true. Fisher absolutely abhorred fighting. His dream was to make, and I'm quoting Drac, who was explaining this to someone at some point, over this conference, because he did it quite well. He wanted to make war so absolutely terrible. War with the British Empire, war with the Royal Navy, so absolutely terrible. The Royal Navy viewed as such dangerous, aggressive, rabid dogs that no one would want to actually go to war. Basically, he was trying to make the Royal Navy a combination of, what shall we use as our point of contact reference today? Okay, Warhammer 40k, we're going to use Space Wolves, a combination of Space Wolves, Salamanders, and Ultramarines. Basically, the brains of one, the ferociousness of the other, and the general loyalty, doggedness, and constant ready to go of the third, all combined into one. Jack Fisher, not speaking softly, walking softly, and carrying a big stick, but instead shouting loudly, waving around a very large sword. Pretty much. Sam David, on their own note, would you say things like Aegis Ashore forts are effective deterrents modern day equivalent to an Aegis ship at sea? I wouldn't say they're equivalent to an Aegis ship at sea, but I would say if you've got no other choice, they're okay. There are actually better systems, I think, than Aegis Ashore. I think Aegis Ashore is a very, very tempting idea for people, but I don't think it's necessarily the best idea. For example, the British haven't turned the Type 45 ashore into an actual air defence position for the UK. Although, actually, if they do get asked to 45 and have it for ballistic missile defence, it might actually be sensible to set it up, because that would provide you with a measure of defence for at least the south coast and London. Especially when you consider where the radar is and what happens when you turn on the full power. So, sniping, mass supplemented by firepower, sniping in the dark, mass supplemented by maneuver. And some of these are combined. Some of these are applied differently. Some navies approach the same thing from different angles. But let's say sniping. Basically think a zebra with a mark on it. Honestly, what was the French plan and the session with sniping when Dreadnought appeared? It was, we will pick out Dreadnought in the battle group, because she's the battleship which is going to stand out. So we're all aiming for her and sink her. And that will cripple the Royal Navy. Hello, Melanie 1640. It's okay. No one wants the people of Portsmouth to breed the renal they already have. We can turn on the giant spare Type 45 Samson Raider above the harbour. Look, it won't affect them that much. It'll just stop them being able to use with their mobile phones. Seriously, you turn on that Type 45 radar, no one will be using their phones within a certain range of it. That won't work. Just too much energy. So, sniping, zebra. But the whole point of sniping, and I'm going to use my empty iron brew bottle, which is annoying because the only full iron brew bottle is in the kitchen. So if I get thirsty, I will be disappearing for a couple of minutes to go to the kitchen and collect the the full iron brew bottle. Torpedo. Now, here is the problem. If I'm doing a sniping, and my torpedo boat is armed with 2 torpedoes, and I fired 2 torpedoes from 1,000 yards. Now, if I fire them as straight as I can, so they're both heading on one course, the ship can do that, and they might be able to go past it. If I spread them wide, it might do that and turn between them and come and crash, smack me down. Because remember, this thing is fitted with a ram. It can go through torpedo boats just as easily as it goes through a submarine. So, 1 torpedo boat firing 2 torpedoes, not a good idea. Sniping. Well, we had the idea. Okay, right then, how do I make this work? Well, A, I need more torpedoes per torpedo boat. B, this is more important, I need more torpedo boats. Which, of course, is where mass is going to come in. But sniping starts off as the first thing. And the idea is basically, almost like guerrilla war, they will harass an enemy formation. They will be constantly diving in, launching torpedoes, focusing on one target till they sink that. Then they'll pick another target, until eventually they run out of torpedoes. That's sort of, is the spare radar actually an installation with the ability powered up? Yep. It's where they did all the testing. Doesn't know. Frenchman, now we sunk the dreadnought, you lose. Brit laughs so hard. French get no answer and thinks to to be fair, what would have probably happened, and this is going to sound strange, is again, you're dealing with HMS Dreadnought. She has the best of any anti-torpedo defense of any battleship in her when she's built. And again, this is partially because who constructs her? A guy who's a torpedo specialist. That is the thing. When Admiral Fisher is building his ships, he understands torpedoes. He builds in torpedo defenses as standard. Yes, they might not be the defenses we would like to see, but they're the best idea they have at the time. Sort of, if you're only 1,000 yards away, how long does it take that torpedo to cover the distance? Well, let's see. At 1,100 yards, let's see, 45 knots. Well, it's, if I remember correctly, it's 35 knots. But let me just check. Yeah, it's 35 knots. So it's 35 knots, which is 40 miles an hour, which means, let's see. Let's see, if I do the quick conversion of miles per hour to yards per second, well, they're going 19 yards a second, which, if I take that and divide 1,100 by 19.69, I'm not going to do that in my head. Please don't make me do that in my head. I'm doing that with a calculator. It's far better to do that in a calculator. I didn't think anyone would ask me this one. I've got all sorts of sums that are next to me, but I didn't get that one. It will take about 55 seconds, 56 seconds for it to turn for a round. But there's a trouble that a minute sounds like a long time, and yes, there is going to be seconds before the ship starts to turn. But that also does mean you have to get within 1,100 yards of the ship. Now, one of the problems with that is that it will probably start to turn and maneuver the moment it sees you coming. So often we think, well, they will wait till I fire before they maneuver. No, they'll see you coming and they'll start maneuvering so as to throw off your firing. And that's the problem. Basically, sniping is a good idea until you factor in the ship's maneuvering. And it's a good idea at the beginning where torpedo boats and things are still new and the ideas are still new. But in early 1900s, sniping really sort of starts to get problematic. And that's when they start to think about other things. 35 knots is the Whitehead torpedo. The Whitehead torpedo in the Austrian pad Whitehead torpedo, which was pretty much one of the standard torpedoes in 1905-6, is capable of 1,100 yards at 35 knots. My theory. Sniping torpedoes really only works well with submarines. That is the thing. That's what I start off to work with, and they do start to move to submarines with sniping. However, it's still there as an idea because you have to remember a destroyer is a surface vessel is incredibly more, how do I put this, more reactive than a submarine. Submarines at this point do not have sprint speed. They are pretty much mobile minefields. As I keep trying to explain to people, submarines are weapons of area denial, not really weapons of hunting, especially in this period. So you send them to a patrol area and they deny the movement through that area. They are not going to be able to hunt their enemy down. They're just going to be there, and if you happen to go past them, rather like you happen to go past a mine, you're likely to get something shot at you. Now, this is the Grand Fleet. This is what happens when you have not one, two, okay. So, I have my columns sailing along. There you go. I have the Americans represented by Water, the British represented by Andrew. I thought that the people, I think someone will get the joke in there. Anyway, so let's say these are just 4 battle squadrons. Remember, the Royal Navy Grand Fleet actually has more. Now, they'll be sailing on as columns, their individual ships. If you get attacked by mass torpedo boats, and I'm talking about a few dozen up to hundreds, well, the process you're supposed to follow when you've got torpedoes coming in is independent maneuver to try and dodge the torpedoes. Now, if you're in the middle, if you're cruising in column formation, in this sort of box, You have more space for that maneuvering because you're each in line. And you're probably not under fire if you're in this position. But if you're like that and you're all in line, sailing along, it gets more complicated. Because if you're... I do need to recycle, but I did keep these around just in case I needed to do a demonstration. So, I'm sailing along, firing. You're firing torpedoes. What do I do? If I say independent maneuvering, some ships might maneuver closer to the enemy, in which case they could get on their own and picked off by enemy artillery. If I continue in the line formation, what am I doing? Making myself easy for the torpedoes to hit me. So my only option, if I think I'm under torpedo attack, mass torpedo attack, is to turn away. This is why Jellicoe does what he does. Now, it makes sense because independent maneuvering could well get a ship killed, could well turn a battleship into a scenario of the armored cruisers getting themselves bushwhacked. It's not a scenario you want to be in. But, and I say this with love in my heart for it all, you also can't stay in your line formation because that makes you too easy. That's, remember, the problem, the whole plan which sniping is based on. The ship continues, you run up, launch your torpedoes, the ship goes on, boom! We've taken out the ship. Well, hey! Again, get myself my Iron Brew battleship. If the ship maneuvers, probably doing that, not going to help. Doing that might help. And that's also, remember the thing, when you fire torpedoes, you don't fire them at where the ship is. You're firing them at where you think the ship's going to be in a minute's time. There are lots of ways of changing where a ship's going to be in a minute's time. Mostly turning the rudder. Believe it or not, some captains actually had the idea that what they should do is, instead of turning the rudder that way, should turn the rudder that way, and turn the ship that way, and try and get it so that the torpedoes have gone past them. They had all these ideas dealing with sniping. When you're dealing with a mass attack, it's problematic. So how do you deal with a mass attack? Well, you go, right then, first things first, I need my own light guns. I'm going to have to turn away from them, but I need my own light guns on ships to sort of deal with a sniper or deal with a mass attack, and that's what they do have on the battleships. But, secondly, you go, right then, you sneaky little things. You're going to try and get your... I'm going to take out your torpedo boats before they even have a chance to fire. I'm going to invent something called a torpedo boat destroyer, and that's going to carry torpedoes as well. So it's going to be able to act as a torpedo boat when it gets close to the enemy, so they have to worry about it, but it will also sink their torpedo boats before they get to me. Voila! Right, I'm just looking at the questions and checking at which I haven't missed too many. I'll tell you vodka. It's alright, I heard most of it. Yeah, don't worry. Then, all the battleships going for independent maneuvering against torpedoes that could recreate the Med fleet with Camperdown and Victoria. That is the other problem. That honestly, especially if you've got independent maneuvering, especially in the scenario where you've got all the ships next to each other, they could end up bashing into each other, which is problematic. So, pretty much, there is an idea, then there is a counter, then there is another idea. This is what goes on in human history, and the idea might last many years. It might be accepted as the idea. Again, humanity has accepted many the ideas. One of the things I love about physics is pretty much everything starts out as a theory before it becomes a law. And it's the same with various things in science. They're described as theories, and sometimes they're described as theories for so long that even once they become really the accepted and pretty much proven example of it, they still remain called the theory because they've now been called the theory for so long. Well, war is just the same, but for some reason, salesmen have worked out that you, as a citizen of your country, do not want millions of pounds of your money in tax spent on a theory. So everything is always sold as a law, as a fact. So, just remember, every time you're hearing someone on the television or anywhere else telling you that this weapon is a super weapon and it will do exactly what it says on tin every time perfectly and there is no counter to it, just remember they're a salesman. And also remember that the counter to stealth aircraft was found in the 1980s, when a World War II radar, which was being used by University of Birmingham from memory as a weather radar, detected a stealth fighter going over it and asked the RAF what exactly the problems were they were creating. And the reason it detected the fighter was it didn't actually detect the fighter. It couldn't detect the fighter. No one could. But it was a weather radar, and it could detect the turbulence being created by the fighter going through the air. Hello! You now have the ability to track stealth fighters. So what do you do when you detect turbulence moving through the air? Well, you send something up to have a look and check what it is, because turbulence sometimes it doesn't usually occur in that sort of level in a straight line, or broadly speaking, straight line, unless it's unnatural. So now we get to mass supplemented by firepower. Okay, so you have your torpedo boat destroyers. Well, you know, the enemy goes and produces their own torpedo boat destroyers. Oh, great. So how are we going to counter that? Well, now what we do is we go, right then, I know what I'm going to do. Amongst my torpedo boats, I'm going to include ships which have more guns. And their job is going to be to take on the other torpedo boat destroyers and destroy them. And oh yeah, I'll put some torpedoes in with them as well, so they can add to the torpedo strike, so we can have more torpedoes. And it starts off with the scout cruisers or the destroyer flotilla leaders. And then it goes into the light cruisers. And eventually, through the period of various evolutions, you get the tribal class destroyers. Then, more guns than torpedoes. Why? Because their job, quite simply, is two things. One of them, I'll talk about in a second, but the first one is simple. Kill or mission kill or basically distract enemy destroyers so that the Royal Navy's mass destroyer flotillas can launch the crushing blow that will blow the enemy to smithereens. that their battle fleet will be forced into disorder and chaos, which will allow the Royal Navy battle fleet to crush them. Because that's what torpedoes are becoming. The idea is you will fire your torpedoes in mass. The enemy will have to move. Some of them will hit, some of them won't. They will crash into some things, into each other perhaps. Well, hey, either way, their formations will be broken. Their firing arcs will be confused. They won't be able to cover themselves. And at which point, your supremely well-organized battle fleet will descend on them with the thunder of almighty king and country and bring Armageddon raining down on them in 15-inch hellfire. Lovely. Small problem with that. Pretty much everyone else has the same idea. Just gonna mention that one. Pretty much everyone else has the same idea at the same time. This is also about the time at which the Juno Cole goes, we still think torpedoes are the be all and all, but we might actually need to build some battleships. At which point the French Navy goes, you don't say! Because currently the only navy in the world where this idea would actually work on is us, because we have no battle fleet. We have the Dupuy de Lome. Mm-hmm. So this is what happens with torpedoes. They are a big factor and a big weapon. But, and this is the thing you have to think about, they have limitations. They are designed by humans and they have limitations provided by humans. Yes, they create a big explosion here, which will let water in. But your ship starts to gain passive defensives, i.e. armor and subdivision, and flooding defenses, etc., which are all going to affect how it responds to being hit by a torpedo. So that means it requires more hits to sink a ship, probably. Secondly, they're going to maneuver because they learn to maneuver, and actually people start to work on various rudder positions. If you know UAD, Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts, you can change the rudder position to unstable, stable, balanced, whatever you want to do on your rudder position. That has an effect. Some people add in more rudders so the ships can turn more sharply, more quickly. They're going faster. They're better protected. All these things start to factor in. But also, you've got other things. They've got their guns to take out the launching platform. The whole cycle of warfare takes on. New weapon appears. It's all conquering. Okay, we make some changes to the base ship to protect it. They improve. They make some more changes. Add in a ship to destroy it. And it's an evolution. So at no point is the torpedo all singing, all dancing in reality. But at many points, at all these points, is also a very critical and very dangerous weapon. Because if you don't, the trouble is with any of these counters, you can do them, but you have to do them because if you don't, the torpedo will get you. And that's the big point when you're using torpedoes, when you're using missiles. You're firing, and it's the law of large numbers. If you fire a lot of them, the defender has to be right and make the correct decision every single time in order to not get damaged. You only have to be lucky once to do damage. They have to be right every time. You have to be lucky. Going on, the US Air Force has the solution to the F-35 complete stealth, destroying radars using F-15s. I think it's F-18s which do the destroying of the radars, because they're the E-18Gs. They're what actually go hunting radars. I don't think they have F-15s. Well, I know they're claiming they're going to use the F-15s for it, but it's kind of strange. The EA-18G Super Growlers are the aircraft which you probably are going to use for it. Or Tomahawk cruise missiles, or whatever replaces Tomahawk. No, it's mainly 1640s. So then we get the torpedo but destroyers with even bigger guns, and put torpedoes on them as well. We call them battleships. Uh, to be fair, you just keep getting more and more ships added in. Half the cruiser designations that I'll come up with in the pre-World War One period are variations on torpedo boat, destroyer, 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 and it's even when you're sort of looking at some of the largest destroyers, the British, largest cruisers the Royal Navy builds prior to World War Two, World War One, they are torpedo boat, destroyer, 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 destroyers, sort of thing. F-18G is Growler. No, F-18G is the Super Growler. The Growler was the previous one. It's a It's a variation of the Super Hornet. Therefore, it must be a Super Growler. It's got to be a Super Growler. Sorry, I don't care what people officially call it. The 18G will always be for me the Super Growler because the Super Growler sounds cool. The Growler is Navy aircraft and is more focused on jamming. I thought Wildwood is usually an Air Force tasking. The trouble is the US Air Force doesn't currently have any aircraft to do the wild wheels or roll. They're reinstating it. The E-18G is the only one which we're actually doing it, and we're actually training for it. And yes, they have jamming, but they also were doing destruction of radars, so they would jam the radars and blast them as well. Senator, in your dad's notes that you know to be true, do you look for sources that say the same thing as your dad's notes? Okay, I do the same thing as I do with when I get access to restricted archives, which I'm not allowed to share the information from. I go and track down sources which agree or disagree or are positioned to provide similar or help or supportive data. So let's say if with my dad's dad is an example, but again, if let's say I get access to an officer's private archive from the family, they very generously let me look at things. In what I will tend to do is go for is if they've said you can look at it but you cannot use this, we'll just let you look at it so you can sort of, is then I can make notes myself. I keep those notes in a separate file, and I make notes of any documents they mention, and then I go and track down those documents, and I see how much of what was in their stuff those documents can corroborate, and I can use those as a source. And then I'm quite happy to use those documents as the source. And so, if ever you see in any of my books or any of my publications that I have put only in one document as the source of something, usually it means my second source was something which I'm not allowed to share. I often, because I am one of those historians who does really like to, when these facts, multi-cite. I like to do multiple citations because that works well for me. And that means that there is at least 2 to 3 points of contact where I've got this information from. So, this is the Battle of Tassafaronga, which I've discussed before. This is sniping in the dark, but it's a different form of sniping in the dark. It's the World War II version of sniping in the dark, where you have a cruiser squadron, you have a destroyer force armed with long-range torpedoes, and they basically launch a mass torpedo attack. Now, here is the thing. Sniping in the dark at long range shouldn't work. One of the often questions I get from people is they go, well, how come the British and the Americans don't develop these really long-range torpedoes and use them? In the Americans' case, I have no real idea other than the Bureau of Ordnance. It seems actually quite a sensible thing for the Pacific. In Britain's case, it's because they presume that the opponent will do similar to them, which means in wartime they expect to be maneuvering. They expect to be constantly zigzagging. They expect to be operating as if they might be attacked by a submarine at any fricking time. Any frigating time, they are worried there's going to be a submarine there. So they are watching for it. So they are maneuvering. They are zigzagging. In which case, according to their calculations, long-range torpedo strikes won't work. Because you fire a torpedo from here, it will take X amount of time to reach there, and you can't, if your enemy is zigzagging, especially at night, launch a long-range strike like that, because they won't be there. Now, that doesn't mean you won't necessarily get lucky, and there are instances where British ships are hit by long-range Japanese torpedo strikes, because even though they're maneuvering around a fixed line, and if you do far enough in the right direction, you can get lucky and hit. So it's not infallible. But the thing is, the British calculation is that it's so unlikely, it's not worth pursuing. We can debate about that, and we can also debate that actually the long lance torpedo turns out to be faster and more viable and more accurate than they expected. They also expected the currents and various other things would play a part with the maneuvering of the torpedo, and it might well also be the fact the British are trying to think about using the 21-inch torpedo for a long-range attack, and the Japanese, of course, invest in the 24-inch torpedo. But, leaving that to one side, that was the British thinking. The Japanese thinking was, we're presuming our opponents are arrogant. They won't be maneuvering. We'll see them maneuvering enough because the nights aren't so dark, and we've got very good night vision gear for the 1920s and 30s, and therefore we can fire a long-range strike and they will hit it. Tassafaronga is a classic example. Why? Because there is one destroyer which is maneuvering, which breaks the rules and maneuvers. We all know that destroyer. That, of course, is the wonderful, never to be repressed, always to be loved, Honolulu. We love the Honolulu. It does really well. However, the other cruisers, well, Minneapolis and New Orleans torpedoed, Pensacola torpedoed, Northampton torpedoed and sank. Northampton also maneuvered, but then tried to continued on in a straight line. Now, Alzowski is pointing out, going, sniping in the dark. Japanese fired full broadside at the torpedoes. Some had to hit. Well, the thing is, once you're doing a long-range strike, it's called, with torpedoes, it's based on the sniping idea. Yes, they're doing a mass sniping, but again, that's what you do in the dark. Again, if you're looking at the British have a similar policy of doing a sniping attack in the dark. I could have put up the Battle of Cape Bon here, where the British go in and go, well, we're doing this at range. The British style to do it is to get closer, fix the enemy targets with 4.7-inch fire, or as when they've got radar, they use radar instead, so that as fires on the enemy deck was the 4.7-inch fire idea, and then aim on the fires. The Japanese are using their visual aims. It is still sniping. Okay? Yes, it's a mass volley, but it's sniping because it's a long-range strike. And that's the thing about it. It is a snipe attack, torpedo-wise. It's not getting in close. The British is more about getting. The British does end up being more about getting in close. Azuki, Honolulu was a cruiser. She was. What sort of night vision gear did the IJN have during World War II? Pretty much, it is very high, very capable low light binoculars sort of things. Visual, standard lenses, but low light design. Let me see if I can find a picture of it. It's basically the optics system. And the trouble is, we know how to put this again. If you ever talk with certain historians, they'll tell you that one of the troubles is the Japanese destroyed quite a lot of their stuff at the end of World War II before any of the Allies could actually get to it. But they don't really have night vision. They have low light equipment. So it's low light, very good optics for gathering in light, sort of the low light stuff. Can't find a decent picture of it. Now, the fastest conventional torpedo is probably the Spearfish. Official specifications are 60 plus knots and 54 kilometer or 29 nautical mile range. Official. But yeah, they were designed to catch. The interesting thing is they are considered capable of reaching 80 knots, and they were designed to catch the alphas. Basically, the British looked at the fastest enemy submarine, the Alpha at the time, and went for a torpedo which had twice its speed. Plus. They are very, very scary systems. And they're still in service with the Royal Navy, have been in service since 1992 and have been consistently upgraded over the last 30 years. I'm told they have not got worse, they have got better. So, mass supplemented by maneuver. Now, this is the interesting thing. When you see World War II, you start talking about smoke, you start talking about those things. They are, of course, trying to obscure visual aids in terms of firing. Often it's considered that in this battle picture, they're producing smoke to obscure a convoy from enemy long-range guns. But they can also be used to obscure torpedo attacks, but they can be most often used to allow destroyers to attack through the smoke. This is something which especially the Italians, but also various other nations, found the British were quite happy doing in World War II, as were the Japanese. Americans would have done it if they had the chance. When they did have the chance, they were quite happy to do it as well. But if you have the smoke being laid by cruisers, and they're putting a nice thick smoke, your destroyers can withdraw behind the smoke, and they not be able to be seen, and then, of course, attack through it. If they know what's going on the other side, or have a rough idea. They come darting out quickly at high speed, maneuver, fire their torpedoes. And the idea is they do this in pairs or sort of more than pairs. And so you could have a mass of torpedoes coming, but they'd be coming, instead of it being the destroyers are all coming from one direction, all turn, fire their torpedoes from one direction, and so you've got a big wave of torpedoes coming from one direction. You might have multiple pairs of destroyers coming at you from different directions, firing their torpedoes. Now, again, it's one of the interesting doctrines going around, and it's probably the last one that works. And it's used at night in night attacks. It's used in daytime attacks and daytime operations. It's also used in the sort of deterrence methodology, but it requires more coordination. That's another thing you've seen as it goes on. The more and more complicated your tactics get for torpedoes, i.e., starts off with individual ships sniping to group sniping, to a mass attack, to group sniping, etc. The more and more complicated it gets to coordinate, and the more it becomes an art. And that is a big problem for the mathematicians who focus on it. It's going to be mathematical certainty. Not really. It becomes more and more of an art, more and more of a coordination effort, more and more of a thought process to get your torpedoes to work. Mr. Homing torpedoes in World War II existed but awful. They start to get better, but they're basically existing by the end of World War II. There are variations on homing torpedoes, things that we would recognize as a basis of a homing torpedo. Sorry, random noise from outside. Sound like someone's firing at me. Poland had a small number of infrared night vision systems. They're using defensive Hell Peninsula and were destroyed to stop German counter. Bulky things, good for artillery directors. Hi, Jack Ray. Torpedoes for surface ships, and there is a good discussion going on torpedoes and submarines in the chat at the moment. Torpedoes for surface ships are always an interesting weapon. They are a lot of explosives sitting on your deck, so which is why people start to get the idea of we'll mount and put them down below the surface. There's also the advantage that if you put them down below the surface, you can fire them without your opponent noticing, which is great. But then they create a big chamber in your hull. And they also make a hole in your own torpedo defenses. Because if you think about it, you have to have that chamber go right up to your hull's edge. And yeah, that's not going to cause any trouble, is it? Because what are the odds of a torpedo hitting where your torpedo defenses are? and where your torpedo defenses aren't, and where your torpedo chamber is. It's something which you hope is not going to happen, but Sod's law dictates that if a torpedo is going to hit anywhere, it's going to hit somewhere it can hurt. Because that's just the nature of the game sometimes. Now, when we're talking about battleships carrying torpedoes, in many ways, them battle cruisers and other large vessels which carry them, they're carrying them as weapons of last resort. They're carrying them as weapons which are not even meant to supplement their main armament, but are meant to be used in a scenario where the main armament isn't working and they find themselves facing a big foe they can't get away from. It's we're going to kill you because you're going to kill us weapon. For cruisers and ships below, they are the weapon you can punch up with. They're your tool. You can go, well, yeah, you have those big guns, but I can fire torpedoes at you. And the thing is, you can fire torpedoes at the opponent, and then they have to maneuver to avoid torpedoes, and that can buy you time to get away, or at least to get out of firing range, or critical firing range. That is the other real thing about torpedoes, and that's another reason why they start being deck mounted. Because you can fire them more sort of towards your stern arcs if they're on the deck, if you need to move and over away. Mm-hmm. So, anti-torpedo torpedoes are credible. I'm not so sure. One of the interesting things, as you probably have seen, me and Drax spent the last couple of days at a defense conference. It was a very good one. And we had a talk with a lot of people. And reading between the lines of what a fair number were saying, anti-torpedo torpedoes are a holy grail, and there are certainly a lot of companies pursuing them. But I'm not quite. I think the one I sort of consider the most viable of the systems at the moment is not really an anti-torpedo torpedo. It's more a decoy mine, a decoy sort of mine scenario where it pops out, rises up to the surface, creating vertical separation between it and the submarine, which is useful because if you can get, as we know, there are the various layers in the sea, and those, if you can get Bernardos like sort of into different layers, that can also affect. It makes something more difficult to follow harmonically using sound. So if you can distract the torpedo to go to rise up layers, that helps. And basically, it draws the torpedo to it, and when it's close enough, it goes boom. And that seems to be the most successful of the various options available. So, look, Nat Warwick said that at one point the British considered putting torpedo tubes on the King George V when they removed the aircraft facilities. Yeah, thankfully they didn't do it for that long. So, also, the RBU, Soviet RBU ASW barrage is supposed to have some anti-torpedo capability. Basically, if you put enough explosive power in if you detect a torpedo coming in time and you can put the barrage down in the right place, yeah, it's basically you're sticking a load of mortar bombs in front of the torpedo. Anyway, the Russo-Japanese War. Always fun to look at the Russo-Japanese War, and always fun to think about the various issues on it. Of course, the most famous torpedo-focused incident is actually the Dogger Bank incident, where there were no torpedoes, but Of course, the Kamchatka thought there were torpedo boats, and so they blew up a load of fishermen. The Battle of Tsushima did involve torpedoes, but to be honest, those are mostly involved at the end. Now, the Battle of Port Arthur, well, that is a different scenario. That has various things going on it the whole time. And it's one of those issues for the war that the torpedoes keep coming up. They're not always successful. There is, in many ways, a sort of je ne sais idea with them. But they are a viable part of it. The first example, of course, is, I think, the night attack on the 8th and 9th February of 1904, when the first four Japanese destroyers approached Port Arthur and launched a torpedo attack against the Palida, which is hid amidships. It's, of course, not maneuvering at time, and the Retsuvan, which is holed below in her bow. Unfortunately, other Japanese destroyers were less successful, with many of the torpedoes becoming caught in extended torpedo nets. And there's your other problem with torpedoes. Yay, they're going to get you, and my torpedo's going to get to you, my torpedo's going to get to you. And there's a sort of net, and it goes, no, I'm not getting through the net. You can't stop a shell with a net. Torpedoes have lots of advantages and lots of capabilities, but the thing is, for all these things, there tends to be an option there if you're prepared to invest in it. Julian, wait a minute. They used the trick of tracking turbulence from the stealth aircraft in the movie Under Siege 2. We've been tracking turbulence as a track stealth aircraft for a long time. Anyway, can't stop a shell in it. Obviously, you've just not tried the appropriate netting. I think the correct amount of steel cable netting might be a bit difficult to try and find. Also, the unsung hero of the Russo-Japanese War, not mine. Yeah, it did cause damage to everyone. But the torpedoes did especially well. Anyway. World War One. Now, of course, I have the Harwich Force here. And of course, we had the Battle of Jutland with its famous torpedo actions. But the fact is, torpedoes are part of World War One from the get-go. They really are. They are an important part of its considerations. They factor into its organisation. The likelihood of facing a torpedo attack is one of the things which drives the numbers of destroyers required for the Grand Fleet, required for the Battlecruiser Force, required for the Harwich Force, required to cover the Channel Fleet, required to cover all these operations. And, of course, that only increases once submarines become more of a threat. Which, of course, then affects whether you're going to convoy your merchant ships, because where are the escorts going to come from? Well, if you take the destroyers from your Grand Fleet's then tied up. And if your Grand Fleet's tied up, then they can't do their job versus the High Seas Fleet. Oh. Welcome to the world. Basically, World War One is a war of mathematics. And everyone is looking at the numbers, and it's constantly a numbers argument. Do we have enough numbers for this? Do we have enough numbers for that? What are our numbers? What are our numbers? Where are they going for? And so you end up with that as the factor. If you got, I have to admit, there are various laws used to describe the use of guns and the superiority of numbers of guns in a battle. There are various laws used to describe the superiority of the number of torpedoes, and everything's supposed to favour the fleet with the most guns and the most torpedoes. Now, of course, the Battle of Jutland, the Royal Navy has the most guns and the most torpedoes. Jutland doesn't go quite to plan. Yes, it's a strategic victory. The German fleet goes home, and whilst they come out again, they don't really come out again in force, and certainly don't come out again for a big battle. But the British fleet don't win the resounding victory they want. The resounding victory, in many ways, they've been prepping for people by pointing out the number of guns they have and the number of torpedoes they have. It's problematic. It's ego, but it's also politically difficult for them. Hmm. Um, yeah. There's a very interesting debate going on there. I've done a whole video about the Germans trying to share stuff with the Japanese. The trouble is, quite all the stuff didn't make it to the Japanese. And you need more than just the technical data. You need samples, etc., in order to reverse engineering thing. And the British did quite a good job of sinking submarines, mostly thanks to minefields, before they managed to reach Japan. So one of them was just who's better with a slide rule then. To be honest, it was a measure of the construction capacity. It was of course we're better, we've got the most rule. And one of the things about Jellicoe is he's one of the few commanders who doesn't really apply that. But he is in many ways caged by that because so many of his officers do apply that rule. And yeah. Yeah, I'm not getting into the jet discussion. There's a gentleman called Frank Whittle, and there's all the British and American jet development prior to the end of World War II, which both powers are working on, which has an impact on that far more than the German designs. And if you read Winkle Brown's book and a few others' books, you'll soon find out that most of the time when they're looking at the Germans, they were going incredibly difficult to maintain, overcomplicated, and oh my lord, did you try to fly the Comet? Now, World War One and torpedoes. The thing I find interesting through the entirety of the war is, in many ways, the deterrence effect of torpedoes works best for the British, and it's called the Harwich Force. Because whenever you start to look at, and this is something I especially have been considering when working through things about like, whenever someone suggests the idea, and I end up having to look at it, Thrawn's run on London. It's the Harwich Force which figures massively in terms of the German analysis. Not just the submarines, but the destroyers, and the fear of a mass torpedo attack at night, which is kind of interesting, as I'm not sure if the Royal Navy would actually do it. And judging by what happens in Jutland, of course, the Harwich Force are at the wrong end, so they don't get to use it. But they might have actually been used. The Tirret, if he'd gone on his own, would certainly have tried it. Hmm. So, BMW jet engine schematics, well, now we're really off topic. Jet engine schematics, an example, were sent, as were the plans for the entire ME-262. Lots of other systems as well. Yeah, and lots of them got sunk when the submarine which was carrying them got sunk by either a British or Japanese mine not far from Singapore, where it had stopped to rearm. And then there's another a German submarine which gets sunk, is actually one of the first submarines, first ever submarine to submarine underwater kill. It's just not a good experience for them. No, he's trying to fly. Could have sworn he did fly. No, he did fly the Comet, as I said, but he didn't want anyone else to try and fly the Comet. Basically, Winkle Brown's response once he got out of the Comet and flown the Comet to get it away from the Soviets was, "No one else ever take that thing up in the air. It's a blooming death trap." No! No, I'm not getting distracted, Steve. I'm not doing this. That's completely off topic, and no. So, no. Alright, CG90. British CMB's Italian Mars boats were quite ahead of the time. Too bad Britain neglected the MTB in the interwar years. Again, the British didn't really neglect the MTB in the interwar years. They just let the private companies handle the development. This is one of the things. Britain, the motor torpedo boat is another example of the Warrior program, the Warrior construction style program, where you let the various civilian companies keep experimenting, developing, and then when war's coming, you go, we'll order whatever's the best is, and it works. Not just the first underwater submarine killed an underwater sub, the phrase is the only. Yeah, it's the only one. I could have sworn it's a death trap. No, flight was already given rule when Brown went and convinced a German ground crew to fuel one up for him. To be fair, Brown did seem to think prior to flying it that it was mainly because the Germans kept putting untrained pilots who were mostly basically cadets into it. That was the trouble, and that you needed a really skilled pilot. Once he got out of it, he basically decided, nope, it's Steve. It's not a good idea. Not a good idea. It's just not. The I-29 made one successful mission from Germany to Japan, and then was sunk on a second mission. The first exchange took place in April 1943. That's not really a lot, and there's not a lot you can really put on a submarine. Plus, the trouble is, most of the stuff she took to Japan didn't get to Japan. It got dropped off in Southeast Asia. And well, U-234 didn't actually make it. Sadly enough. Not good enough for the Allies. Anyway, interwar exercises had a factor, and they were quite important for development of the destroyers in the interwar period. The British especially did this. Now, why am I giving the British more credit than the Japanese or the Americans? This one, the Americans did their big fleet problems and the fleet exercises, but to an extent, how aggressive the destroyers were allowed to be and how realistic they're allowed to be depended on who was in command. There are some admirals, and I'll be covering this at certain points while going through the American cruiser program, who basically said, "Go off, practice as if for war." And there are some admirals who go, "Don't damage your ships, no scratching of hulls." British, the whole way through, basically go, if you break it, you board it, but carry on doing it. The Japanese, unfortunately, thanks to the top-heavy nature of most of their destroyers, had issues with some of their exercises. As the interwar period goes on and their destroyer designs actually get better and they start lying more about them, then they start to get some good exercises in. But this means the British have a sort of advantage with the exercises. But as said, the Japanese have their doctrine, the Americans have their doctrine, and the British have their doctrine. So all of them have their different styles of approach. All three are basically focusing on fleet formations of destroyers being used for large attacks in terms of fleet grouping and defense against torpedo attacks, but also to an extent they're looking at smaller force actions. It has an effect on the number of launchers, it has an effect on the style of launchers and torpedoes and the way you design it. And also it has effect in terms of Britain because they start thinking about logistics for deploying forces to the Far East. And that starts being a proviso for their deciding how can they sustain forces that far away. I mean, you'd think the Whitehead torpedo was obsolete, but it was used operation in 1940s quite successfully. Yeah, because it's a big explosive bang, and if you're in range and it hits you, it's going to cause trouble. That's different. Didn't the motor torpedo boats become obsolete in World War II? To be fair, motor torpedo boats became motor gunboats as well, MGBs, and they had lots of other uses in World War II. But yeah, not really obsolete. They did start to run out of targets at certain points. That's always a problem when you run out of targets. It's one of the scenarios that you have to remember for the Allies. Sometimes you get people turn around and go, well, the Allies' vessels that are this aren't as good because they don't sink as much as the Axis force, and you sort of turn around and go, you have to consider that as against the target richness, there is far more larger merchant forces, merchant marines operating on the side of the Allies than on the Axis, and therefore you would expect that if they're getting roughly the same percentage of kills, that's going to affect things. So it's going to look statistically wise. Wow, if we're looking at the raw tonnage numbers, Axis do far better than Allies. You look at percentages and the deployments, and you sort of go, they're roughly about the same levels. And as Citra 90s point out, motor torpedoes have evolved into the fast attack craft, and we usually arm with missiles, sometimes armed with other systems. The Finnish especially have some. There's the Visby class as well. The Finnish ones are probably better as fast attack craft. The Visbys have to cover a lot of roles, and that has affected them. I think especially it was interesting. I was talking with a Swedish, not a Swedish academic who's involved in their research side and their defense research side at the conference, and it was An interesting conversation about the Visby class. I'm basically going, well, yes, we built them out of plastic because we were worried about mines, and I'm supposed to be doing mine warfare. But at the time, we actually had our own MCMVs. If we continued to have MCMVs, we could and built the Visbys out of aluminium or even steel, then they would probably have been just as good, just as quick, but a third to half the price to build. In which case, we could have built twice as many and then built a whole load of MCMVs as well. And you sit there and go, crewing that number would be interesting, but I can see your point. Wait, so they bring the pay for it. Wait, when did the British lie about? The British didn't lie about the destroyers much. No, the British lie about their destroyers just about as much as everyone else. Everyone gives an average figure of what their destroyers should be, just about below the tonnage limit that they're supposed to be. And the fact is, if you look at the things, the destroyers often lie shamelessly. I don't think there's a single tribal class destroyer which fits under the tonnage limit. A standard displacement or otherwise when it's completed. Admittedly, by the time they're completed in 1938 and 39, the British have basically stopped following the treaty in 1937 because the Japanese have left it. But theoretically, the British are still holding to treaty standards, hoping to get the Japanese back to the treaty table. So theoretically, they should still be following it. Unofficially, they do claim now. Right. Second, just 1 second. I, as you know, have run out of iron brew for a while. I have now run out of it from my glass. I'm going to go get my other bottle. I'll be back in a second. Skål class. Thank you. Yes, they're the Finnish ships. They're really good. And cute. And make skål. Okay. Dog water bottle. Yeah, iron brew. There we go. Hello. So skip through something, hasn't it? Let's go to the summary. Hello. Right. And I brought back meatballs as well. Mm-hmm. In 1640, Carl Blucher was sunk with 2 white-hot torpedoes. Who would have thought sailing at slow speed, broadside to a torpedo battery, a few hundred yards away, was a poor idea? It affects things. This, of course, is a long-lance torpedo. It looks cool. Now, but the Vikings were such friendly, lovely people. Captain Seaforth, thought the RA never cheated. I just wrote loopholes big enough to drive a battleship's TDS through. No, our own cheated just as much as the US and the Italians, and they all cheat in their own ways. That's the thing about the treaties. They all had their own definition of cheating, and what's allowable. And in the British case, there's all sorts of things that have to be allowed for, and it's terrible. We've got all this electronic equipment that we're adding in, fire control stuff, which is, is it part of the standard displacement of the ship, or is it not? No, the Skalds are Norwegian. The Finnish one is the Hamina class, isn't it? Could be. Yeah, I think you are right. They're all quite cute ships, though. No, C-90, the water is for the engine. Remember, the Americans get one of the things that shocks Ernest King is that because of the huge amount of water being stored for British battleships, according to his intelligence and only briefings, he presumes British engines are incredibly inefficient and incredibly water hungry in order to get power. It's one of the reasons why he is quite so shocked when he gets the information. Oh no, that's part of their armor schemes. He's going, what? But your engines are terrible. No, our engines aren't that bad. But you have to carry so much feed water for them. That's what's not included in the limits for in standard displacement. Feed water. Well, yeah, it's not included. So we just carry more than we need. A lot more than we need. A huge amount more than we need. Oh, and by the way, we might have converted some of that feed water supply to actually carrying more oil supplies. Oh. Did you know who makes British torpedo engines? That's an interesting question. Now, they've just started a new batch production of Spearfish torpedoes, which are being built by BAE Systems Underwater Systems, and they started production in 2020. Yeah, the British actually stopped producing torpedoes between 2003 and 2020, because they didn't need any more, because we weren't going to have, it was going to be wars of choice. Then in 2020, they started production again. So there are now Spearfish torpedoes, next generation, under production. Now these very interesting vessels. Very cute vessels. pretty darn critical to fleet operations and useful systems. They are built by BAE, but I think the engines are produced by a company called Sunstrand, who were acquired by Rockwell Collins in 2000, or was it United Technologies? Anyway, I think it's Sunstrand Corporation, who are supposed to be based in Illinois. I just voted on oil doesn't count against the treaty either. Nope. Carmen, is the Warship magazine any good? Admitting that I occasionally write articles for it, yes, it is. Warships International Fleet Review is good. Right, so summary. Torpedo development happens. It's one of those things. Weapons won't sit in a vacuum. War doesn't take place in a vacuum. It's a product of the technology and the culture around it and the civilizations that produce it. The very scientific French take a very scientific approach to the torpedo. The British, who always affect to be not scientific but turn out to be fairly engineering-y, scientific-y anyway, also do that the same and professionalise it quite a bit, but apply a sort of different policy. The British scenario isn't based on whittling down their opponents to numbers that they can take on, because they're bigger than them. The British scenario is based on freeing up the battle fleet so it can go and attack the enemy. It's a different purpose. Now, once you start with those are your basic points and starting points, you then have your two films of evolution. In many ways, the US hop between two. They start off with sort of looking at it for the frontier defense, the Junacol, and then moving on to the British methodology at a certain point as well, mostly by about 1912. The Japanese start off very much in the Junacol. Russo-Japanese War forces them pretty much to adopt the British methodology. Torpedoes are part of fleet actions, they're part of fleet forces, but they're also there to free up the battle fleet to go and find the enemy. The Americans are just as crafty in their own way. Let's be honest, the Saratoga and Lexington are massively overweight. And that's fine. It produces very capable ships for the US Navy. That's fine. There's an interesting discussion going on in chat, which is distracting me about the Blucher and the torpedoes which attacked it. So, right, any questions? And I hope you found this useful. I know it's been a bit shorter than normally we do, but honestly, today has been a fun day. The long patrol being its normal 70, roughly hour-ish. But yeah, today's been interesting. Today's been chasing my tail. Recognize they're not overly massively overweight as the treaty allowed it, honestly. Yeah. You're allowed an extra few thousand tons for anti-submarine defenses and AA defenses, which they include all sorts of things in. Take care, Sage. Lieutenant Glynn, Tanef, thank you. Tanef, does the modern day ship-to-ship missile replace a torpedo? Pretty much. Replaces the anti-shipping torpedo in terms of ship usage. Vision, you're like a billion times more productive than I am. Let's see. Today I don't feel productive. I've written 4 PowerPoints and I meant to write 6. I visited the dentist, walked both dogs twice, which was fun because they like to have their individual walks. Walking them together is they don't like it because they think they're not getting. They like to have the sole attention of the person on the other end of the lead. They are both attention seekers. And if you walk them both together, they try and divide and walk off in different directions. And yes, you control them and all those things, but it's a lot of more effort than just walking them individually. And then I had to go around 3 pharmacies to get my mum's prescription, which was just annoying. Oh well, it happens. They didn't have the stuff for a. Last year, when did the British start the program to replace the Mark IV torpedoes with Mark VIII torpedoes? Well, pretty much as soon as the Mark IV torpedoes came into service, they started a program for that. The British 21-inch torpedoes. Let's put it this way: the British start off with the Mark IV being replaced by the Mark V in A and B class destroyers and Kent class cruisers. Then the Mark VII goes for the counter class ships being built for that sort of period. And then the Mark VIII comes into service in 1927. So honestly, they start the Mark VIII in program is being looked at in 1925. That's when it started properly, but there have been the Mark VI was worked on prior to that. So the Mark VI is sort of the example of the Mark III. The Mark III is being developed in the time between the Mark II and the Mark IV. But the Mark II it was designed in 1910 and entered service in 1914. The Mark IV started being designed in 1912 and entered service in 1916. These are sort of the program. Torpedoes don't come about quickly. They have to be tested quite rigorously before you can use them. As you can remember, 9681, are the Fairy Barracuda, Cromwell, and Comet tanks victims of when the best is the enemy good enough? Pretty much. Although, to be fair, the Cromwell was pretty darn good. I have a soft spot for the Cromwell. Sidron 90, do you think torpedoes will get bigger or smaller? I think they'll probably stay the same size they are. I think they might get sort of adapting. I wouldn't be surprised if we see someone at some point possibly having a torpedo which fires off multiple disintegrates into multiple torpedoes, kind of like the Starstreak missile system. But I also think the high-speed torpedoes are probably going to be coming back in fashion. Spearfish has, of course, started its production the last couple of years, and I wouldn't be surprised if the eventual next generation heavy undersea weapon is fast. Vision, have you contacted people at Buffalo Navy Park? Yes. We're in. For me. yeah, there is a problem. Manly 640 immediately brings up the Mark 14. You're supposed to do extensive testing. And again, the British do have an advantage in this, in that they can basically take the torpedoes anywhere in the world, especially in peacetime, and go, we're launching torpedoes. We have a base nearby. It's fine. The Colonel goes, no, those whiteheads had a standard compressed air bottle, but not the torpedo juice. Range to exceed the sound's width. Yeah, well, that's the thing. If the sound is less than 1,100 yards wide, and you're going 35 knots, in a position where the enemy can't maneuver, you've basically set up a kill zone. Wainsworth, long good complaint. Long patrol, RN ran, RCN and RNZ and was very quiet. Can't hear you. I have no idea why, unless you're... Are you finding me quiet this evening? Because you shouldn't be, because the system's all set up exactly the same as it was, and I haven't played around with it. Unless, of course, and this is something I say nicely, the joyous thing known as XSplit has started playing around me. It shouldn't have done. The noise gate is turned off. There's no parametric equalizer on. The compressor is on at the top range, so I don't go massively high. But that's so I don't burst anyone's ears when they've got headphones in. And that sounds like a lot got done today. No. I only managed to record one video today. Didn't manage to record the 3 I wanted to. So that's annoying. So I'm slightly behind on my recordings going into next week. But I've not got that many to record. Let's see, I've got a list. Things I need to do list for calendar trip coverage. Recording videos. I need to record. I've got that one recorded. Pensacola class is recorded. Basically, I have got 4 videos I have to record before I go for coverage while I'm away, and well, 5 preferably. Most likely, well, I really should do 7. There are 7 videos I like to get done before I go. Plus, I've got to record re-record the long patrol for today, and long patrol for the survey ships, and the SMS Admiral Sprawn long patrol, because I don't like the current one I have. So I've got 10 videos I've got to record by Monday, pretty much. No sound is good, so I have no idea what will happen in that long patrol. If the Mark 13, 14, 15, 18 torpedoes work sooner, does that change effect? What change does it bring? It probably it gives you more successful kills earlier on. And again, as I've said before, there's a compound thing in wartime. What you start the war with is mostly what you will fight, what you start with the war as being actually in service and available is mostly what you will fight most of the war with. It takes a long time for more ships to enter service, and those will often just be replacing ships you've lost, especially ships you lose in the first couple of years. So the thing is, the better quality weapons you have at the beginning of the war, the more likely you are to take out crucial assets at the beginning of the war and have a compound success. So again, this is the thing that goes back when I'm talking about the carriers, Glorious and Courageous. If they survive, if even one of them's available for longer in World War II, that has an impact on the war. It probably means Mirza al-Kabir is a bigger strike. It probably means there's a bigger strike on Taranto. There is probably, if you've got bigger strikes in those scenarios, you probably get more damage onto the Italian fleet. You get more damage onto the French. That can affect deployments. If the Italian fleet is damaged more, then that's going to affect how many ships they get out to sea and how quickly those ships get repaired. Because remember, one of the things we often talk about is Taranto buys the Royal Navy a few months, then Mataban buys a few more months, but they don't provide control of the sea. They just buy some time where the Royal Navy can feel relatively confident. The more time you buy, the more ships you take out, the more the effect is. So you have Glorious. Let's say Glorious survives. Norway doesn't get sunk. If you have her at Merza Kabir, you double the strike aircraft at Merza Kabir. Okay, what effect does that have on the French? Who knows? Probably they lose more ship. They actually get some ships damaged and possibly sunk, and that force is therefore is able to be completely ignored. Which is also going to have effect on the number of the concentration of force you're going to need for Operation Torch. But then we go forward. Okay, so fine, that frees up that, which frees up to an extent Ark Royal to spend more time operating between groups. You've also got Glorious, could go around with Illustrious, go to the Mediterranean, be part of the Mediterranean fleet, be part of the force there. If she's there operating there earlier with Eagle, then Eagle might well be maintained better. But if she's there with Illustrious and Eagle, then Eagle's not going to need to be so involved in operations, which means she might probably gets maintained and checked earlier, because I've been over. The theory is basically they were saying she was keep going because they desperately needed a second carrier available for operations. If you have 3 carriers, you can have 2 available, and the third one can be being maintained, which might mean you end up with 3 carriers, or at least 2 involved in the Taranto operation. That could double, even treble your strike aircraft for Taranto. That makes a big impact. If you have 3 waves of 24 torpedo bombers coming into Taranto, or bombers coming into Taranto, the damage done to the Italian fleet will be that much greater. Do we know how much more that greater? We don't. But the fact is, if the ships have already been damaged and already sinking, any more torpedo hits on certain ships is going to cause them permanent damage. Yes, they're going to still be at the bottom harbour. Yes, there's still going to be a recovery rule. So will they be out permanently? I don't know. But the amount of damage will delay their getting back in service for longer, which then affects the use of ships earlier and more. So it might mean that the Italian fleet is down so low that you can take the Warspite and Queen Elizabeth out of the Mediterranean fleet and send them to the home fleet to support the operations versus Bismarck and versus the German capital ships, which might mean that instead of Hood being on call, she's in refit, and Denmark Strait is Warspite Warspite and Queen Elizabeth and Prince of Wales. Or he does Warspite and Prince of Wales, and Queen Elizabeth and Queen Elizabeth and King George V are the 2 battleship hunting groups out at sea, and that's what he deploys his forces. This is the thing you have to realize. These are compound issues, especially with capital ships, especially with large complex assets. Early losses can have big impacts down the line. Longer term availability will have a compound effect on your opponent. It's funny how the Moscow had torpedoes. On theory, SW helicopter removes the need for torpedo them. Most of the ships tend to carry torpedoes because they're basically your I'm going to die because the submarine's in torpedo range of me, but I'm going to kill her anyway weapon. So, Jonathan, have you gotten the seed of any posting on Discord? Not yet. I should do. But if I open up Discord, it sometimes gets annoying with XSplit, so let me open it up on my phone. This, I presume, is for the 4th. Comms, communications, Discord. Canada trip. Fisher's Pier 4 pub. Oh, that's cool. So, I'm going to confirm. Look at. Oh, that looks a nice place. Oh, that will definitely keep me and Drac very happy. Thank you. Yeah, we'll be very happy there. That looks like very nice food. Oh, there's dessert section. That'll do me. Oh, that looks like a good burger. Yeah. Oh, there's outdoor seating. Oh, that looks. Oh, lots of food. Yeah. And there's doggies. Oh, that's good. Sorry, if anyone doesn't realize what I'm doing, I'm looking up the apparent pub where we are on the 4th, which is Fisher's Pier 4 pub. And they've got pictures and reviews on Google, and they've got a 4.4 out of 5, which is fairly good as far as I'm concerned. And yeah, look nice. And it's in Hamilton. It's a very short walk from. Oh, it's literally straight down the street. Yeah, from Hyder. Oh yeah, pretty much. We walk out of Hyder, we're almost there, almost. Yeah. Oh, that'll be great. Thank you very much for that. That was lovely. Google by the way, where can I submit a topic on Patreon? Every time on Patreon I advertise basically topic every month at the beginning of the month I usually say, look, here topic suggestions, next week topic vote. So if you're on Patreon, you can find the topic suggestions. Should do. They should come up and it should tell you. Time to vote. Does a harder hit on Mirza Kabir cause more political difficulty? Unfortunately, not really. Basically, basically you hit Mirza Kabir, it's going to cause political difficulty. The more you hit it, the basically you just make it slightly less worrying for the British vis-a-vis the French ships becoming German. And the British are reacting almost out of instinct at that point. Fellas, can you upload the oldie baddie SMS Admiral Sprawn video to Patreon? Possibly. I'm considering uploading some videos to Patreon, but Patreon doesn't like sometimes all the videos. Anything 4.4 on Google. What is going on with shipping? Well, that's information pack power plants live. Yes, naval history is coming. Yeah, this was May, June. I haven't updated this one. That's terrible. That is absolutely terrible. We'll leave that to one side. Yeah, that's the old side. But this is the naval history is coming equitable cruiser 2100 cruiser and equitable treaty long patrols. So yeah, you can see all that's coming in June. There are a lot of videos coming in June. You are going to have a video a day pretty much till June. Let's see. June the 20th is going to be the first day in June without a video. Yeah. Monday the 20th of June is going to be the first day in June without a video. All been recorded in advance. All the long patrols will have been recorded in advance before I go, including the one for the 18th of June. And there's a live on the 19th of June because that's a brew ships. There will be a live on the 18th of June. Yeah. There'll be a live on the 18th of June because that's the 18th of June. So there's lives both the 18th and 19th of June. There's going to be there's going to record a video on the 17th, which is the long patrol for the 18th of June. Yeah, 16th, 15th, 14th. Yeah, there's going to be a video pretty much every single day. Because on the 16th of June is going to be the live for the treaty series. Mission 90. Would there be any benefit to making a silent torpedo? They've made a silent torpedo. They try and do it, but it tends to be a bit slow. Zachary, are you going to or try, or have you tried poutine? I'm going to let Drac try it first. If he enjoys, then I will try some as well. But I'll just watch him. Basically, I'll let him have it 24 hours before I eat it. Right. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found this a good video. And yeah, well, it will be 3 hours long when it's finished. But yeah, I wanted to say thank you for everyone for watching. Thank you for the super chats. Thank you for the people who have done super thanks. It's been really quite funny, fun, interesting, but also quite funny. Sort of going, getting message going. What's that? Super. I'm not live. I'm not doing a super chat. Oh, it's a super thanks. Oh, thank you. Thank you to patrons. Thank you to the subscribers. Thank you to everyone who watches the channels and views and watches the adverts, because you've made this trip to Canada, etc., possible. If it wasn't for you, I definitely wouldn't have the money to be going. So thank you. Thank you, John Shea. Thank you, William Bzowski. Thank you, William Cox, Rick Traversoa. Richard, you make more videos than I can watch. I've got to give you something to do when eventually you retire, Bijon. Catch up on all the videos you missed. Thank you, Stafford. Thank you, 9681. Thank you, DG40. Thank you, CJ90. Thank you, Jack Ray. Thank you, everyone. And yeah. Dan Verka, are torpedo casings made of steel or plastic's a thing? That's a very interesting conversation to be had. But, well, how do I put this politely? I would suggest that torpedo hulls tend to be very, very special. How do I put this? Alloys. Yes, we'll go with special alloys. Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Donna Callahan. Thank you, Wellsworth. And we should make the entire visit of the Hyde alive. Well, you never know. If things work out, I might do that. Who knows? I'm certain everyone would love to see you kiss a ship. There's a reason on the 3rd I'm there with no one who can record me. On the 4th, I will be under emotional control. I will be British on the 4th. On the 3rd, who knows what I'll be. Fanboying over a destroyer properly. Shamelessly. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care, and thank you. Take care, everyone. Have fun. Do they have pretty good cell data service around here? They do, I'm told. They do. Anyway, take care, everyone. Thank you, and once again, thank you all as well. Also, if you're ever at a trade conference with NVL, they do great rubber. These ducks are great, honestly. I like that duck. It's a very traditional one, but this is just cool. It does sort of look like it. Look, if it had a helmet on it, it would be the 4 duck from, I don't know, from the various Marvel movies, wouldn't it? Let's be honest. Look at those wings. Do they or do they not remind you of Thor's helmet? Take care, everyone. Have fun.